Long before the world was carved into kingdoms, before men raised empires upon stone and steel, there was fire, and from that fire came iron that could think. It is said that in the forgotten dawn, when God still walked among men, there existed artisans, not of flesh, but of brilliance. They were called the Hephistines, smiths of the divine forge. Unlike ordinary craftsmen, they bent not only metal, but the spark of life itself, giving motion to what should not move, giving voice to what should not speak. From their forges came the first automata, statues of bronze that walked, soldiers of steel that never tired, guardians that stood eternal at the gates of kings. These were not mere machines, they were living myths, bound by gears and spirit, by alchemy and thunder. The world would know many names for them. In Greece, they were called Talos-blooded, kin of the great bronze giant said to patrol the shores of Crete. In Persia, they were whispered of as Deva of iron, demons of metal forged by forgotten gods. And in India, they were remembered as yantra, divine instruments brought by the heavens themselves. But in all lands, they carried one truth. Where they walked, history was rewritten. The age of men and the age of machines did not always stand apart. There were kings who sought to control these constructs, to use them as weapons, guardians, or symbols of divine right. Yet most failed, for the automata would not bow easily. They were bound to codes older than human speech, to purposes older than conquest, until one came who bent them to his will. Ancient scrolls, long hidden in Alexandria's libraries, spoke of a prophecy. When the child of lightning is born, the bronze shall march, and the world shall kneel. That child was Alexander of Macedon, a man born of flesh, yet followed by whispers of gods, a conqueror of empires, yet remembered not only for his battles, but for his command over the legions of iron. Some say Alexander's mother, Olympias, dreamt on the night of his conception of a serpent of bronze coiling around her body, hissing with sparks. Others claimed that Philip of Macedon, his father, once found a fragment of a broken automaton buried deep in the hills of Macedonia, its eyes glowing faintly like embers. He brought it to his court, and from then on, strange lights were seen in the palace at night, and the boy Alexander grew surrounded not only by men, but by whispers of machines. By the time he was 12, it is said Alexander discovered a hidden chamber beneath the Macedonian palace, a vault of forgotten Hephaestine relics. There, in the dust of centuries, gears stirred when he touched them, as though awaiting only his command. The child of lightning had awakened the first of the bronze companions. Before his rise, the great powers of the world trembled in uneasy balance. Persia stretched vast across the east, mighty yet bloated with age. Greece squabbled in endless rivalries, city against city. Egypt slumbered in memory of its ancient gods. And India, beyond the edge of maps, was whispered as a land guarded by strange beings of stone and steel. This was a world ripe for conquest, but no mortal king could have taken it alone. It required one born not just to lead men, but to command machines. A king who was not only flesh and blood, but myth. And so begins the chronicle of Alexander the Great, Lord of Flesh and Bronze, the Machine King, whose armies were of men and iron alike, whose victories reshaped the very bones of the world. This is not the tale of a man alone. It is the saga of a conqueror and his machines. Every empire begins not with a sword, but with a child. And so it was, in the kingdom of Macedon, that a boy was born who would bind together both men and machines under one destiny. Alexander entered the world in 356 BCE, on a night when storms rolled across the Aegean like armies clashing in the heavens. Lightning split the sky above Pella, Macedon's capital, striking so close that palace guards swore the earth itself shook. At the very same moment, far away in the temple of Artemis at Ephesus, flames engulfed the shrine, consuming it entirely. Priests of the oracle declared that the goddess had turned her gaze away from Asia, for a child had been born destined to claim it. But Olympias, Alexander's mother, spoke of an even stranger vision. She whispered that before dawn she dreamt of a serpent wrought of bronze entering her chamber, its eyes glowing with inner fire. It coiled around her body, neither harming nor frightening her, but instead humming with a sound like grinding gears. When the boy was born hours later, his first cry was said to echo like iron striking an anvil. The priests of Macedon took it as a sign. The child was chosen not only by the gods, but by the ancient machines. Alexander's youth was unlike that of ordinary princes. Where others would taught only swordplay and statesmanship, he walked between two worlds, one of flesh and one of bronze. In the courtyards he sparred with boys his age, learning to fight with spear and shield. But in the depths of the palace, in a chamber forgotten by time, he discovered something far greater. The chamber was called the Hall of Sparks. Buried beneath Macedon for centuries, it was a vault filled with relics of the Hephaestions, remnants of the age when gods and machines walked together. Broken fragments of automata lined its walls, their hollow eyes staring with eternal patience. For years they had lain silent, until Alexander entered. The moment his hand brushed against a bronze face, gears shuddered and dust fell from the ceiling. A faint hum filled the room as though a heartbeat had returned to sleeping giants. The boy stumbled back in awe, but returned night after night, whispering to them as if they were alive. And slowly they awoke. When Alexander was 12, a test came that would mark him forever. His father, King Philip, presented him with the legendary horse Bucephalus, a beast so wild that no man could tame it. The court mocked the boy when he asked to try, but Alexander, instead of wrestling with the beast, studied it with the patience of one who understood both man and machine. He saw the shadow that frightened it and turned Bucephalus toward the sun, calming the horse. In moments, the wild stallion obeyed him. What few knew was that the same day, deep within the Hall of Sparks, another creature bent its will to Alexander. An automaton shaped like a warrior, half broken, missing one arm, stirred from its slumber when the boy placed his hand upon its chest. With a grinding roar, it rose to one knee before him. Its eyes burned with red fire, and though it spoke no words, the meaning was clear. It had chosen him as its master. This was the first of his bronze companions. To shape his mind, Philip summoned Aristotle, the philosopher of Stagira, to tutor the boy. Aristotle taught him poetry, science, and strategy. But Alexander's curiosity went further. He would ask his teacher not only about men and nature, but about the old myths of machines. Did Daedalus truly make statues that could walk? He would ask. Was Talos of Crete only a story, or was he real? Aristotle, cautious, gave half answers. There are truths hidden in myths, he said. The world is filled with secrets not meant for all men. But perhaps, Alexander, you are not as other men. The boy pressed further, sketching gears and levers in the margins of his scrolls. Soon he no longer saw machines as tools alone, but as companions of destiny. It was in these lessons that Alexander formed his vision. A world united, not by endless war, but by order. Men and machines bound together in harmony, serving a single great empire. Not all welcomed the boy's bond with the machines. Within Philip's court, whispers spread of sorcery, of unnatural powers. Some feared that Alexander's rise would bring ruin, for they remembered the prophecy. When the child of lightning is born, the bronze shall march, and the world shall kneel. Among his rivals, envy grew. For while others trained with soldiers of flesh, Alexander was said to walk at night, accompanied by a silent bronze figure, who followed him like a shadow. Many believed it to be a trick, until they heard its heavy steps echo through the palace halls. By the time Alexander was 15, he no longer dreamed only of Macedon. He gazed east, across the lands of Persia, across deserts and mountains, toward lands whispered to hold machines greater than any he had seen. He declared to his companions, "I will not only conquer Persia, I will awaken the sleeping gods of bronze, and when they march, no wall, no king, no empire will withstand us." Thus began the dream of conquest, a dream not only of empire, but of the uniting of flesh and metal beneath one crown. Every conqueror begins with a single campaign. For Alexander, it was not only an army of men that marched with him, but a new power the world had never seen, the awakening of bronze companions. At 16, when his father Philip rode to war in Thrace, Alexander was left as a regent of Macedon. Many thought the boy too young to rule, yet fate wasted no time in testing him. A rebellion rose in the north. The mighty, fierce tribes of the hills poured into Macedonian lands, burning villages and defying the boy king. Alexander did not hesitate. He gathered his forces, not only Macedonian soldiers, but also the first awakened automata that had answered his call from the Hall of Sparks. The mighty expected a boy leading farmers. Instead, they faced iron-helmed warriors whose eyes glowed with fire. When the rebels saw the bronze companions advancing, they thought them demons. Spears splintered against their shields, arrows shattered against their bronze hides. Where Macedonian phalanxes pressed with discipline, the machines pressed with impossible strength, never tiring, never retreating. Within days, the rebellion was crushed. Alexander rebuilt the captured city, renaming it Alexandropolis, the first to bear his name, and the first city founded with the help of his mechanical guardians. The world had taken notice. King Philip, returning, marveled at what his son had done.
But though he admired Alexander's genius, he grew uneasy. Philip had conquered with men. His son, it seemed, would conquer with something greater. Already rumors spread across Greece that the boy commanded spirits of bronze, that Macedon harbored a new army unlike any the world had seen. Some in Philip's court whispered fear. If the sun commands machines, who shall command the sun? But destiny cared little for mortal doubts. In 336 BCE, Philip of Macedon was slain at a feast, struck down by an assassin's blade. Chaos erupted, but amid the blood and confusion, Alexander seized the moment. As rivals rose to claim the throne, the palace trembled with the echo of iron steps. The bronze companions marched into the hall, standing at Alexander's side, their glowing eyes fixed on the nobles, and in silence their presence declared what words could not. The machines had chosen their king. None dared oppose him. At only 20 years old, Alexander became king of Macedon.
To secure his rule, Alexander turned south to Greece, where city-states resisted Macedonian power. Athens, Thebes, Sparta, each proud, each unwilling to bow. But Alexander carried with him not only phalanxes, but iron phalanxes. At the gates of rebellious Thebes, he unleashed his bronze companions in open battle for the first time. The world had never seen their like. Rows of automata, gleaming in sunlight, advanced shoulder to shoulder beside human soldiers. Their shields locked seamlessly with Macedonian lines, their steps pounding like drums of war. When Theban warriors struck, the machines struck back with crushing force, spears driven with inhuman precision. Thebes was leveled. The lesson was clear. Resistance was folly. Greece bent the knee. The League of Corinth was formed, and Alexander declared its purpose: the invasion of Persia. Before he crossed into Asia, Alexander called upon the gods at the Hellespont. Priests said they saw strange lights in the water that night, as though bronze serpents swam beneath the waves. When dawn broke, the Macedonian army, tens of thousands strong, marched across the narrow strait. Yet even more terrifying was the iron host that followed. Witnesses in Asia spoke of it in whispers. They came not only with men, they came with a river of bronze, eyes burning like coals, spears glowing in the dawn. The ground shook with their march, and the Persians trembled.
The Persian satraps gathered their forces at the river Granicus, determined to crush the young invader at once. But the moment battle began, Alexander revealed his secret. As his cavalry charged, the bronze companions stormed the river. Water foamed around their iron bodies, yet they did not falter. Persian arrows rained down, but the machines raised their shields, creating an unbreakable wall. Macedonian infantry poured in behind them, protected by bronze that no human hand could match. The Persians broke. Legends spread through Asia that day, legends of invincible iron soldiers who fought at the side of a god king. From Sardis to Halicarnassus, cities fell before Alexander. Yet always the stories carried ahead of him of bronze warriors who never slept, who obeyed their king alone, who tore through walls and shattered gates. Some whispered that Alexander himself was no mere man, but half machine, forged by Hephaestus. Others claimed he carried within him the spirit of Zeus, and the machines were his thunderbolts. Whatever the truth, one thing became certain. The age of old empires was ending, and the march of bronze
had begun. To conquer cities on land is one thing. To take an island fortress defended by walls rising straight from the sea is another. Yet Alexander, king of flesh and bronze, would prove that no wall, whether of stone or of ocean, could withstand him. In 332 BCE, Alexander marched south, claiming the coasts of the eastern Mediterranean. City after city fell, some by battle, others by surrender. But when he reached Tyre, the jewel of Phoenicia, he faced defiance unlike any other. Tyre was no ordinary city. It stood upon an island, half a mile from shore, its walls towering over the waves. For centuries it had resisted siege, for no army could breach it. Its fleet commanded the seas, its gates laughed at invaders. When Alexander demanded entry to sacrifice at the temple of Melkart, the Tyrians mocked him. "You may be lord of the land," they cried, "but the sea is ours." They believed no army of men could touch them. But Alexander did not march with men alone. The Macedonian army stood gazing at the island fortress. To many, it seemed impossible. To others, suicide. But Alexander's eyes burned with certainty. He turned not to his generals, but to his bronze companions. From the depths of his host they marched forward, dozens, then hundreds, their bodies gleaming like molten suns beneath the Mediterranean light. They carried not only weapons, but tools of strange design, gears, chains, and beams of iron, things no ordinary army possessed. And under Alexander's command, the machines began their work. The king gave his order: "If the island cannot be reached by ship, then the land itself shall walk to it." So began the impossible, the building of a massive causeway stretching from shore to island. By day, Macedonian soldiers hauled stone and timber, but by night the machines toiled. Automata of colossal size carried blocks that would take a dozen men to move, dropping them into the sea. Others pounded the seabed with iron fists, driving foundations deeper than any diver could reach. Sparks lit the darkness as bronze arms hammered wood and metal into shape. Fishermen watching from afar whispered that they saw fire beneath the waves, as though the sea itself was being forged into land. The Tyrians, watching from their walls, realized too late that this was no ordinary siege. The boy king commanded not just men, but an iron host that built as well as it fought.
The Tyrians struck back fiercely. They sailed out in swift ships, hurling firepots and stones at the causeway. They launched burning rafts to destroy the work. But the bronze companions met them in the surf. Some waded chest-deep into the sea, lifting rafts with inhuman strength and hurling them aside. Others formed iron shields to deflect fire. A handful, built with hollow bellies, waded into the water and sank beneath the waves, only to rise again beside Tyrian ships, clambering aboard like sea demons and tearing the vessels apart with bronze hands. The Tyrians began to whisper that these were no machines, but spirits of the deep, servants of Poseidon himself. As the causeway neared the walls, Alexander unleashed his greatest marvels yet. From the shore, massive siege towers of bronze and wood began to roll forward, taller than the city walls,
bristling with catapults and covered in iron plates. But unlike ordinary engines of war, these towers moved on their own. Great automaton, shaped like oxen of iron, pushed the towers tirelessly, their gears grinding as they advanced step by step. When flames were hurled at them, the machines did not falter. When stones crashed down, they only pressed forward, smoke hissing from their joints. Upon the walls of Tyre, defenders quailed. Never before had they seen engines that marched as though alive.
The final assault came like a storm. The causeway, now complete, carried the Macedonian army to the island. But in front marched the Iron Tide, Alexander's bronze companions, ranks of gleaming warriors advancing with implacable force. Behind them rolled the siege towers, their catapults hurling stones that shattered battlements. When the machines reached the walls, they did what men could not. Some drove iron claws into stone, climbing like beasts of bronze until they tore down entire sections. Others locked their shoulders together, forming an unbreakable ladder of iron upon which Macedonian soldiers swarmed upward. The Tyrians fought with desperation, their courage fierce, but against the Iron Tide, courage was not enough. The walls fell, the gates shattered. The city of Tyre, proud for centuries, was conquered. The news spread like wildfire. If Alexander could conquer Tyre, the unconquerable, then no city was safe. If he could command machines that built bridges to islands and towers that walked, then no fortress could withstand him. Persia, Egypt, India, all whispered in fear. The age of men had not ended, but it had changed forever. Alexander was no longer merely a king. He was the lord of flesh and bronze, and the world would soon bow before him.
Conquest may be won with the sword, but the right to rule the world comes from the gods. And so Alexander, lord of flesh and bronze, turned from the battlefield to the desert, seeking the voice of the divine. After the fall of Tyre, Alexander marched into Egypt. To many Egyptians, the Macedonian appeared not as a conqueror, but as a liberator from Persian rule. They welcomed him with offerings and prayers. Yet Alexander sought more than gratitude. He desired confirmation of destiny. Across the desert, in the oasis of Siwa, stood the oracle of Ammon, the god whom the Greeks called Zeus Ammon. It was said that those who entered the temple heard the very words of divinity, and that the oracle would reveal the truth of one's birth. Alexander set forth, guided not only by men, but by machines.
The desert of Libya was vast and merciless. Sandstorms rose like living beasts, swallowing men whole. Soldiers whispered that no caravan could cross without divine favor. Yet as the Macedonian army pressed onward, the machines marched unshaken. Their bronze feet sank into the sand, but they did not falter. Some carried great cisterns of water upon their shoulders. Others bore entire wagons when horses collapsed. When a storm of blinding sand swept over the host, men fell to their knees, choking and lost. But the bronze companions lit their eyes with fire, creating beacons that pierced the storm. Step by step, the soldiers followed those burning lights until they emerged alive. The Egyptians who traveled with them whispered in awe, "These are no mere machines. These are servants of Ammon himself."
At last, Alexander reached the oasis. Rising from the desert stood the temple, ancient and solemn, its walls etched with hieroglyphs of gods both human and animal. But within its shadows, Alexander found something stranger still. The priests led him into the sanctuary. As torches flickered, he saw statues of bronze animals, lions, hawks, bulls, not still, but breathing. Their chests rose and fell with a faint hiss of steam. Their jeweled eyes turned to follow him. They were divine automata, guardians of the oracle, older than Greece, older than Persia, built, perhaps, by the same forgotten artisans who had forged his own companions. The priests bowed before him, but Alexander's eyes widened, for he knew then that his destiny was not only written in heaven, but in the hidden language of machines.
In the innermost chamber, Alexander stood before the image of Ammon. The air trembled, not with voice, but with a sound like 1,000 gears turning in unison. The oracle spoke. The words, whether divine or mechanical, were heard only by Alexander. Some say the voice told him, "You are the son of Zeus Ammon, born not of men alone. The bronze answers to you, because it is your birthright. Go forth and rule the world." Others claimed he emerged pale, as though he had seen his true self reflected, half man, half god, half machine. When his generals asked what the oracle had said, Alexander only smiled. "It called me son of Zeus. That is enough." Soon after, Alexander was crowned pharaoh of Egypt. At Memphis, he was declared master of the two lands, and at the mouth of the Nile, he founded a city that bore his name, Alexandria. But even here the machines played their part. Bronze companions carried the first stones, setting them in place with perfect precision. It was said the grid of Alexandria's streets matched not only the stars above, but also the hidden diagrams etched into the Hall of Sparks beneath Macedon. The city was not just a seat of empire. It was designed as a city of men and machines together, a place where destiny would converge.
When dawn broke, Persia beheld a sight no eyes had ever seen. Ranks of Macedonian soldiers stood ready, their phalanxes gleaming. But in their midst, stretching like a wall of fire, were the bronze companions. They carried spears longer than men, shields broad as doors. Their eyes glowed in the morning sun, 1,000 burning stars. Behind them rolled the great iron towers, pulled by automata shaped like oxen, their catapults primed. The Persians muttered in fear. Some claimed they saw giants of bronze among Alexander's host. Others swore the machines roared with the sound of thunder. It was not merely an army. It was a storm of steel-made flesh. The battle began. Darius unleashed his chariots, their blades whirling to cut down phalanxes. But when they struck Alexander's line, the bronze companions braced, and the chariots shattered upon them like waves against a cliff. The machines tore horses aside with bronze hands, snapping wood and iron alike. Persian cavalry charged, but the automata advanced with impossible speed, driving spears through armor, their formation unbreakable. Then Alexander himself led the charge, riding Bucephalus at the head of his cavalry, flanked by bronze companions who ran beside him like living statues. Where he struck,
the Persian line broke. In the chaos, Darius beheld not merely men, but iron warriors who could not die. His courage failed. He turned his chariot and fled the field, abandoning his army. The Persian host collapsed. The King of Kings was no more. And Alexander, son of Zeus, son of Ammon, Lord of Bronze, stood master of the world.
From Babylon to Persepolis, cities opened their gates. Alexander's machines marched through Persian palaces, their bronze hands raising Macedonian standards upon walls that had stood for centuries. At Persepolis, when the palace burned, witnesses swore they saw machines standing in the fire unharmed, their eyes glowing brighter as if feeding on the flames. The old empire had fallen. A new one had risen, not merely of men, but of men and machines. Yet even as Alexander marched further east, whispers grew. Some said the machines were restless, bound only to his will, and that if he died, they would vanish like smoke. Others claimed they were eternal, waiting for the next chosen king. But one truth remained. Never before, and never again, would the world see such a union of man and bronze. In another world, in another telling, Alexander might die young in Babylon, leaving his empire to crumble. But in this world, his legacy is eternal. He is remembered not only as Alexander the Great, but as Alexander the Machine King, the conqueror who marched with iron legions, who bent bronze to his will, who reshaped the age of empires. And though centuries have passed, though kingdoms have risen and fallen, the legend endures. When the child of lightning was born, the bronze marched, and the world knelt.